I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're listening to Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs, and the sins of the underworld. We're Ireland's top podcast for 2025, and now we've got a new website. So if you want to learn more about crime and criminals, if you want stories, extras, and podcast subscriber specials, go to www.crimeworld.com. James Brannigan moved across the border in 2002 after he met and married a Northern Irish woman. Once up there, the Dublin man decided to fulfil a lifelong ambition to join the police. He'd applied to the Guards when he left school but decided to go to college instead. With a new wife and planning a family, joining the PSNI was a no-brainer. He started in 2005, and by and large his new colleagues were welcoming to a man from the south with a distinct Dublin accent. There were some tricky moments, like the time he answered a call for help at a domestic incident. The victim, thrown by his accent, rang the police station back, demanding to know why a Free State man was in her home. But it was a relatively quiet and peaceful time, those few years after the Good Friday Agreement was signed. It wasn't all easy though. The threat from terrorists ebbed and flowed as the years went on, and tensions began to rise again. There are times he remembers his kids watching him as he checked for bombs under his car in the morning before he set off for work, a situation he never expected to find himself in. But he loved his work and never regretted signing up. After 2 years on the response team, he went for detective, getting stuck into larger investigations, usually around extortion, sometimes a murder. By 2008, he'd been promoted onto the major investigations team in Armagh, which dealt with a bit of terrorism and a lot of murders. He and his colleagues worked hard to solve complicated cases and bring the perpetrators to justice. He enjoyed a lot of success over those years, but it was the families of victims who relied on him and their relief at whoever killed their loved one being convicted that gave him his biggest sense of achievement. During his time with the PSNI, he made some observations about the kinds of murders being committed. For instance, one that he calls hidden homicide. Murders that people tried to dress up as accidents, sticking bodies in large bodies of water, or elaborately setting up a scene to hide any evidence of an unlawful killing. He also has theories about the North and the kinds of crime committed there, like how it has one of the highest rates of domestic murders in Europe and the high rates of teenage suicide and teenage drug abuse. Like others, he reckons it's down to the intergenerational trauma from the Troubles. He has a pal who's doing a master's about the post-conflict era, who talks to him regularly about their findings and other studies that have examined the residual issues of the Troubles, and which have no chance of getting sorted until there's a better understanding of how people in the North and their offspring have coped with what went before. It's interesting, all those things. I mean, there's the highest tablet use as well, isn't there? Pills,
yeah.
On the streets for the drugs. There isn't the same maybe issues as cocaine or whatever, but...
And it's funny, I remember getting into why heroin never took off up here. Because they don't like needles. There's a dislike to needles in Northern Ireland for some reason. And it's too expensive to smoke.
It's amazing that it didn't. I mean, given the 2 hours
in the 80s, it
was
just so widespread in Dublin, and the second biggest city, and it's never entered.
But they love they love those street pills, the Zimmos and all that. But that's all about trauma as well.
It is, and you look at, like, for example, I worked with a colleague and he saw 2 women being shot dead separately. And I remember, he's an intelligent guy, and you're looking at him going, that can't not have an effect on you. Think about it. Or you think about it in this terms, where if you're down south and you're in a Gaelic club, rugby club, soccer club, and somebody in there is part of a family who's been involved in a tragic incident, let's say died in a car accident, or even was murdered, it'd be possibly one person, if any, that would be in that club. You go into a club up here where there's a rugby club, soccer club, Gaelic club, you can look at the people and say the trauma that family has, the trauma has been inflicted on them. And there's one guy I knew up here and used to know him socially in the Gaelic club I used to socialise in. And I met him in a bar one day and he was looking at the news and it was Convy Fox shooting in the Haddock trial. 2 men were shot dead in the car. There was somebody who was in the back that survived. And he says, I was the one in the back of the car. And I never knew it. It just suddenly dawned on me his surname and who he was. And, this is what you're dealing with up here. And it's everywhere.
You never think you're going to meet somebody who's had that experience in a lifetime, let alone...
Yeah, you've known them for years and you didn't know, but you're bound to have issues when you witness those things. And in the communities, what was happening separately in the communities, and the police weren't used or weren't engaged with because it was paramilitaries in certain communities and they were running the show.
It's all going on as well as trying to police and...
Yeah, and trying to police normally, and then with the threat, and this is something that from an early time in the police, I looked at where you'd be carrying an MP5 small machine gun and there's a domestic and you're bringing a machine gun to a domestic. What image is that to the kids, to the family, or even just at a checkpoint?
You see all these issues because you're not from here, I suppose. And
yeah.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and this is Groomed, an investigative series from Crime World Presents. Episode 6, Mountains of Mistakes. In 2019, James Brannigan scored an incredible success with his investigation into the murder of Charlotte Murray, a 34-year-old woman from County Tyrone who disappeared in 2012. Her former fiancé, Johnny Miller, claimed she'd left the country to start a new life and produced texts that he said proved she was still alive. Brannigan and his team, however, were able to prove Charlotte's phone had never left the flat they'd shared together. And despite never finding her body, which is still missing to this day, Miller was found guilty of her killing and is currently serving a 16-year prison sentence. It was a legal first in Ireland, a murder conviction in the absence of a body. And Tanya Fowles, who covered that case in court, remembered Brannigan well. That feeling is now mutual. Brannigan can vividly recall getting his first phone call from Tanya in 2020, back when we were deep in the first wave of the pandemic.
I had just not long finished the Charlotte Murray trial. It was the first no-body murder conviction in the island of Ireland. COVID had hit. I had a lot going on at the time. I was working from home and I was extremely busy. And then it was on the 11th of August, around 2 p.m. I'll never forget it. I got a call. It was from a woman and she said, "You don't know me. I'm a journalist. I covered the Charlotte Murray trial." He says, "There's a woman, I don't know if you're aware of the woman that recently died in Derry, Katie Simpson, and her sister's boyfriend found her, but he's history of serious domestic violence." She gave me a brief background and the people have concerns and people have been going to the police. So you're duty bound, somebody rings you, member of the public, to do something about it. So I looked at it. First of all, I rang the major investigation team in Derry and said, were they aware of it? And they said, yeah, why are you looking at this? And this was the first response. And I said, no, I've just got a call about it. Yeah, well, she tried to kill herself last week. I felt a bit stupid. Why did I not? Why haven't I seen that? So I went back in to look at the incident, and you look at a person and all the incidents with the police, and there is an incident on the 3rd of August where it's attempted suicide, and then the 9th of August, sudden death. And I said, what is this? And I looked at it. When I looked at it, they'd created 2 incidents. One was the attempted suicide when she was taken to the hospital, but then they created another incident when she died in hospital. So it wasn't the previous attempt, it was the same incident, but they had made 2 and they had looked the way they had looked at it. I knew though by the reaction, I couldn't go back to them. It was like, why are you looking at this? I knew I couldn't go to my superiors about it because of the workload I had. They would have said, leave that to the officers in Derry. So I decided to look at it. Tanya had asked a question. I didn't know her name at the time, but she had asked, were we looking at it? And I decided to look at it in my own time. So I looked at the incident, the log. Every occurrence called incident has a occurrence log of every action police take and what you input on it. Looked at the log, looked at the post-mortem photographs. She had this bruising, and I looked at the bruising, and the bruising was striking. She was on the post-mortem table, and never forget, her two fists were like boxing gloves and black and blue, just badly swollen and bruised. She had all these lines up her leg, bruises, up as far as her knee. She had bruises on her inner thigh, bruises on her arm, and there was a big bruise on her shoulder, then a small cut on her lip and a tiny mark on her neck. I'd come across suicide victims in the past or people who had hung themselves, and it didn't look like, I'm not an expert, but it didn't look like a ligature mark. It was just a small bruise. I rang the pathologist for why he said possible hanging, and he said because she'd been in hospital for a week, bruises may have dissipated. And I said, yeah, well, the other bruises haven't. If there was a bruise in her neck, would it not be still there? He can't say because he didn't see her the day she came into hospital. So, I could understand why he then was saying there's no bruise, but I asked, why did you make that decision? And how was she found hanging? So she's died because of lack of oxygen to the brain. How is that? The person who found her said it's hanging, so he put down possible suicide. Or possible hanging, not even probable, just possible hanging. I remembered when I got the call that somebody had posted on Facebook that I knew, a guy called Chris Falloon, saying, get well soon, Katie, we're thinking of you, we're worried about you type post. And I twigged that this is the same person. Because I remember when I saw it, I was thinking, has somebody been killed in a car crash? You'd usually hear of it, but nobody had. I couldn't understand. I said, right, this is obviously what Chris was on about. So I rang Chris and said, Chris, can you see if she'd fallen from a horse? She was doing an event on Sunday before she died, or before she went into hospital. And Chris said he would check, and he came back quite soon after saying, no, she'd a clear, she never fell, and nobody saw her fall or be trampled by a horse. So that I spoke to Nuala, the last DVO, domestic violence officer who had dealt with Creswell, and I could see he had a previous conviction for a serious assault on Abigail Lyle, and there was a video online at the moment.
You could see that on the log or online?
I saw it first because I think Tanya sent me the video of Abigail giving an account online of the attack on her. I had that. When you go onto the police system, anybody's previous convictions will be there, but you have to go dig for them. Something like what he did 10 years ago won't be there in flashing lights, won't be there as a red flag. You go dig and you will find it. And it is there, but you have to dig for it. It's not good, will not be clear. So.
And did you look on the system about him? You looked at the sort of what you could.
I looked at what I could.
Do you remember that? Because this is obviously a key point that the original detective team say they couldn't, there was no sign of these,
It's a hard thing to explain. You go onto the system and you look at it, and there'll be little tabs and there'll be flags. So you go into flags, for example, if you're wanted, you're disqualified driver, something like that, it'll be in the flags. So somebody would hit the flag, red flag first, and see, right, what's here? Then you would have to go into cases and look through the case history and then click into, because it's not clear what each case represents. Then you could go to convictions and go out of that system and go into the convictions, and you can get some of these convictions and look down and see what the convictions are. You will have to dig and dig. It's not going to be apparent for you. So if you're a response officer going out to something, you would ask the controller, here, is there any flags in this individual, any warnings? No, there was no warnings. There was nothing to say this guy is a danger to women. This guy has been abusing women in the past.
So do you kind of understand why it happened the way it did? Or do you think that when those questions were being raised that somebody should have gone into the convictions or should have gone into the case?
But they did, because she was in hospital for a week. The day after she went into hospital, one of the response sergeants I know, they all thought this didn't make sense. The uniformed guys thought this did not make sense. One of them came in the next day after Googling Creswell and finding this video, going to a sergeant saying, look, this is the guy from yesterday.
So you don't think anything was ever removed from the system? You're just basically telling us the system is clunky.
The system for that is clunky. So that happened in 2009. the system niche had only come in at that stage, or 2007 had come in, and all files from our old system have been dragged across to it. Where you want to go for the likes of that is, let's say you arrest somebody, you want to see if they previous convictions. You'll then go in, look at their criminal record history, and what have they been convicted for? When have they been convicted? And that's something you do in time. There's nothing there to say this guy is a violent offender. It would be a violent offender, for example, red flag. If he would kick off regularly, it'd be a red flag, right? This guy, be careful. Is there a firearm at that residence? It'll be in the flag. Be careful, there's a firearm. Those types of flags come up immediately. These are the things that can cause you harm if you go out. There's nothing, and I don't blame the uniform officers because it wouldn't be there, obvious and transparent to you.
It's one of the big questions that hangs over Katie Simpson's case. How could Creswell's history of domestic abuse, his conviction, and the few months he spent in jail for attacking Abby Lyle fail to be flagged after he drove Katie towards the hospital in Derry? James Brannigan doesn't think his record was removed from the system. It's just that the system is clunky, and sometimes you have to go digging if you want to get the full story. But there were other red flags. He noticed some of them straight away, from the results of the post-mortem to photographs of the hallway where she was supposed to have tried to hang herself. And then there was this issue of Katie's missing phone. He went to talk to all the people who knew Katie best, including her childhood friend Chloe Scott. He would also interview Creswell and Christina. Their accounts of Katie's final months were all very different.
I spoke to Tanya, spoke to the pathologist, looked at the postmortem photographs, looked at the scene photographs. And the scene photographs, I couldn't work out how she, not saying she couldn't have hung herself, but how. Because there was a towel taken over a quarter of the banister and there was bags behind it, so you couldn't have hung yourself over the banister at that point. This is all in my own time because I couldn't ask people to do things for me because then, well, what is the investigation? What are we investigating? There was no investigation.
And was this normal or was this just something got you on this?
Something got me on it, and especially when the police in Derry said, no, there's nothing to see here. And the fact that her phone was missing, that was the other big thing. Her phone was missing. The young girl not having a phone doesn't make sense. And it's just questions need answered.
I presume it wasn't normal for you, though, to do this sort of thing in your outside town. There was probably an element of COVID there as well, was there, that everybody was...
Yeah, there was an element of COVID, but you wouldn't have normally done this. But I just felt to find the answers, I had to do this before I took it. And I couldn't take it to my boss and say, listen, got this, well, go to your boss with the answers. You stop him asking questions of it. This is what I have. What do you think? So I went out and met the Scotts, Susan and Chloe Scott, and they were friends. Chloe was probably best friend of Katie. And we spent a number of hours with them one evening, and the energy they had and the pain they were suffering as a result of this, and the picture they painted of who this guy Creswell was, and how he was controlling Katie, and how they went up to try rescue her one day in Donegal, and he stopped them. You know, it was harrowing what they told you.
And how did they describe what was her life like?
You know, when herself and Chloe together, it'd be happy kids, up to everything, up to every bit of mischief, and just enjoying life. And as soon as Creswell turned up, the child changed. It's the head's down, she's going to the car. It's just like, just a different child. And a child she was.
And they knew her really well because she often stayed with them.
She stayed with them many occasions. And as I say, is Chloe and Katie would be into all sorts, messing, and they were as thick as thieves, the two of them. And talking to Chloe and the fun they had together and the mischief they got up to, and you know, it was harrowing, the pain they were going through. And you could...
They also would have gone through their teenage years together and boyfriends and things like that and normal stuff. Did they talk
No,
about
because she would have went away at an early age, about 14, I think, or 13, 14. He got his claws into her and had her up and she went to Scotland for a while and then back and then ended up in Donegal. But he would have initially got hold of Katie when he was working at the yard down in Tynan. With each place he got moved out of because people didn't like him in the end and with the things he was doing.
But they suspected as such. She never came to them. She never told them what was happening. They suspected there was something wrong and they didn't like him.
Oh, they didn't like him at all. They could see how he was treating her. It wasn't they suspected this is a bad person. No, the Scots knew this. This guy is not good. There was no ambiguity about it. From early doors, it wasn't like they'd formed this conclusion when she had allegedly committed suicide. They knew all along this was a bad guy.
James, were they saying to you that Katie would never have committed suicide?
Yeah, it's like saying no, she can't. They were giving me the reasons why they believe she didn't. She bought these new boots. Her sister was given birth. She had all these events planned. Things were on going. You can never know what somebody's thinking. So I wasn't going to them, oh yeah, this is an investigation. The exact words I told them was, the best I can offer you is that I come back and tell you Katie has committed suicide and this is why I believe she's committed suicide. Or two, I don't believe she's committed suicide and this is why I don't believe she's committed suicide. And that's, I said, the best I can give you. You need some clarity on this and I will try get clarity on it. I never thought I'd be going as far as it did. So I left that day. I never forget being outside the door that day and going away and the whirlwind you'd gone through with the two of them. And the pain and heartache they were suffering and the not knowing and the questions they had and the story they told me about this horrendous individual and how he treated Katie. So after I spoke to them, I think that was all I did that week. So I knew at 2 p.m. on Friday the 15th, I think it was, of August, that we would take on call. Because this happened in Derry, I was working in Armagh. I had no jurisdiction, but at 2 p.m. we took over on call and I took to my chief inspector and said, I need you to look at this. I gave him a few minutes and he called me over and said, yeah, get the team over. We need to look at this. And that was his reaction. This needs to be investigated.
So this must be a political thing within the police as well, because you're recognising something outside your remit, outside your jurisdiction, and you're going to have to kind of go to... How does that work?
This thing, I knew I couldn't go to them, but I went to my chief, who was the chief at the time in Gough, and he said, yeah, call the sergeants over, the rest of the sergeants, right, we're working on this for the weekend. And I was like, happy days. And that was my focus during the week. I had to get this looked at properly. I needed a team looking at this. To get these answers, you can't do it all yourself. What I gave to him was, she was allegedly found hanging with this guy with this conviction. Here's the video. This is what he's done in the past. He got her down, didn't call the ambulance. Somebody else called the ambulance. The phone is missing. There's a lot of questions here. So then we look at, right, who are the people around this? So it was Hayley Robb who was coming up to meet Creswell. She'd rang the ambulance. So go speak to her. What did she see or what did she know about what happened? Then Jonathan Creswell and his partner Christina, I'd arranged them to come in on Monday. I had two detectives from the major investigation team in Derry and two detectives from CID in Derry to pair up and talk to both of them on Monday. Now, the imperative thing on Monday was you get a statement. You have to get a statement of his account of what happened. Got officers to speak to Hayley. So officers speak to Hayley that weekend. And a couple of hours after speaking to Hayley, Hayley rings the police back and says, my friend Jill Robinson has contacted me and she told me to remind you that Katie was trampled by a horse on Sunday night. And this rang alarm bells for me. I said, why is somebody ringing in to say she has bruises when she's committed suicide? Why would you do that? It's not you ring the police yourself. You're getting somebody else to ring the police and tell them something. And it was bizarre. And that I remember that distinctly. Why has she done that? It just didn't make sense. And it did raise more suspicions than anything else. Then on Monday, the four officers spoke to Christina and Johnny. And it was pretty much, we thought she was going to kill herself. She did this, was strange. She did that, was strange. And just trying to make out she was unstable at the time. But the one thing he said that concerned me about both of them said was she had Find My iPhone turned off. Why would your sister's boyfriend know if your Find My iPhone is turned off? Why did he need to be monitoring where she was? And it just jumps out.
You essentially had you and your guys doing one thing, and Derry, you were bringing them in when somebody needed to be questioned, and you were like, I'm not totally understanding how that works. So can you ring Derry and say to the detectives, I need these guys questioned?
Because we were looking at it for the weekend and we had autonomy to investigate this weekend, instead of sending 2 of our guys to Derry, as soon as you come in on Monday, will you go do this job Monday evening? And it's the practical way to do things. We've looked at this at the weekend. The 2 witnesses are in Derry, major investigation team Derry, you look after it.
It's like something of a police drama, though. It's like somebody saying to you, I'm going to give you 2 days.
Oh, yeah, to investigate it. And I knew that's what I would have the two days. And as my opinion, it was enough time. You know, you have all your team working on it for the 2 days. And in credit to the team I worked with, they were brilliant. And they worked their socks off on the 2 days. And a lot of them were looking at this from afar going, this does not seem right. And they could see it as well. It wouldn't have got to where it is without them.
After the 2 days, you came out of it even more determined that this is a murder inquiry.
No, it wasn't coming out as a murder inquiry. We need to answer the questions. And this is what it's all about, answering the questions. Where's her phone? Why was she hanging? Or how did she hang herself? How did he get her down? Why are the girls talking about the bruises? You can't jump. You have to go in with an open mind to this. And so on the 20th, is the night of the 20th, never forget, I stayed up to about 3 a.m. doing a report and putting everything together because I knew this had to be right. This had to hit the nail on the head and be factually correct what I was saying and ask the right questions. So I did a report, it was 8 or 9 pages, using scene photographs, autopsy photographs, background to the whole incident, but all the way through questions. Why, how, why is this happening? Why? How did he do that? And just asking questions. And then my last paragraph, and a paraphrase that I put in, there's a lot of questions that need answered in relation to this investigation. And the resources and ability lie within the major investigation team, and this where this investigation should rest. You know, this is where it needs to be. A number of weeks later, I got a call from a detective sergeant in the major investigation team in Derry to say this woman has rang in to say her husband has, or a woman she knew said her husband has information in relation to the Katie Simpson inquiry and he wants to talk to police. I contacted this man, his name's Paul Lusby. He was a cousin of Jonathan Creswell, and he had, when I spoke to him, it was clear he had a lot of information about the background, how they were living, concerns nurses had when she went into hospital, the fact she had a boyfriend, other stuff we didn't know. And it was a lot of information he had, and it was pertinent. So I started talking to him quite a lot because he knew what was going on up there, and he knew how things were going, and he was telling me about the control he had over all of these women. So I would, again, I engaged with Women's Aid at the time, saying, if we move on this, how do we get these women to talk to us? And, you know, as they told me at the time, it was, go softly with them. You know, if these women are being controlled by this individual. Didn't say there was a crime committed. Nobody's saying he killed Katie, but what's going on? We said, right, James and his team and Armagh, myself, were to interview friends and family to get more facts. And the major investigation team in Derry were to interview the nurses, because in my report I had included what the nurses were seeing: unfamiliar vaginal bleeding, the bruises, the concerns they had, and the concerns raised. And so, right, talk to the nurses, talk to friends and family, go away, come back to me in January after you've done that. So I was like, right, now we can get further into this.
You've been listening to Groomed, a Crime World Presents limited series, edited and presented by me, Nicola Tallant. Written by Jane Finnegan. Contributor and researcher, Tanya Fowles. The series producer is Ian Malini. Nasa Comiskey is assistant producer.